Jake had always believed he was smarter than everyone else. Ever since he was a kid, he enjoyed making jokes at other people's expense. He wasn't a bad person, but he loved feeling like the funniest guy in the room. When he got his first real job as a waiter at the Golden Prime Steakhouse, he thought it would be easy. Serve food, crack a few jokes, make some tips, and go home. Simple. But Jake had one big flaw. He didn't know where to draw the line. His humor often went from playful to rude, and he didn't always realize when he was crossing it. On his first day, he walked into the restaurant with confidence. The Golden Prime was one of the most expensive steakhouses in town, a place where rich people came to eat the best food money could buy. The restaurant had tall glass windows, polished wooden floors, and sparkling chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't just a place to eat, it was a place to experience luxury. The manager, Mr. Collins, was an older man with sharp eyes and a serious face. He greeted Jake with a nod and handed him a uniform. "Welcome to the Golden Prime," he said. "This isn't a regular restaurant. We serve VIP customers here, celebrities, businessmen, athletes. Our job is to make them feel important." Jake smirked. "Don't worry, Mr. Collins. I got this." The manager raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He had seen many young waiters like Jake before, overconfident, full of jokes, and completely unaware of how the real world worked. He just hoped Jake would learn fast. As Jake started his shift, he quickly figured out the basics. The other waiters moved with speed and precision, balancing trays and refilling glasses without making a sound. The chefs worked in the open kitchen, cutting steaks with expert hands and grilling them to perfection. Everything in the restaurant ran smoothly, like a well-rehearsed performance. But Jake wasn't interested in following the routine. He wanted to stand out. His first few customers were ordinary people, businessmen in suits, couples on dates, a few wealthy-looking families. He started cracking jokes with them, testing the waters. Some laughed, but others gave him strange looks. At one table, a man ordered a salad, and Jake raised an eyebrow. "A salad? In a steakhouse? You sure you don't want a kid's meal instead?" The man gave a forced smile, clearly uncomfortable. At another table, a woman asked for extra dressing, and Jake chuckled. "Oh, you like drowning your food, huh?" She laughed awkwardly, but didn't seem amused. The more Jake joked, the more he felt like the star of the show. He didn't notice how the other waiters gave him warning glances or how Mr. Collins sighed every time he walked past. Jake thought he was making the dining experience more fun. He had no idea he was walking straight into a lesson he would never forget. That evening, the restaurant had a special energy in the air. The tables were full, the kitchen was busy, and the soft sound of music played in the background. Jake was feeling good. He had made it through most of his shift without any real problems. He thought he was doing a great job. Then the front doors opened, and a large man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a powerful presence. He wasn't dressed like most of the other guests. While many men wore suits and expensive watches, this man wore a simple t-shirt, loose jeans, and sneakers. He looked comfortable, almost as if he had just come from the gym. A few people in the restaurant turned their heads when they saw him. Some whispered among themselves. A couple of waiters straightened their uniforms and exchanged quick glances, but Jake, who wasn't paying attention, didn't notice any of it. To him, this was just another customer. The man walked in with 3 other people, 2 friends, and a younger man who looked like his assistant. They laughed and chatted as they found their seats at a large table near the back of the restaurant. They seemed relaxed, like they had been here before. Mr. Collins, the manager, stepped forward and greeted the man with a warm smile. "Good to see you again, sir. Welcome back." The man nodded and smiled. "Thanks, man. We're hungry tonight." Mr. Collins personally led them to their table, something he rarely did. Normally, he only greeted VIP guests at the entrance and let the waiters handle the rest. But this time, He made sure the group was seated comfortably before stepping away. Jake finally noticed and frowned. It was strange. Why was the manager giving this guy special treatment? He didn't look like a CEO or a famous celebrity. He just looked like a regular guy. Before Jake could ask, another waiter walked up to him and whispered, "Hey, be careful with that table." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The waiter hesitated, then said, "Let's just say, he's important." Jake scoffed. Yeah. Everyone here thinks they're important." The other waiter shook his head, but didn't say anything more. He just walked away. Jake shrugged and grabbed his notepad. He didn't care who the man was. To him, a customer was a customer. And if this guy thought he was special, Jake was going to have some fun with that. He approached the table with his usual confidence, pulling out his pen. "All right, gentlemen," he said. "What can I get for you? Something simple, I assume." The big man looked up at Jake and smiled. "I don't know, man. What do you recommend?" Jake smirked. "Well, our steaks are expensive, so hopefully you brought your wallet." The man's friends chuckled, but the man himself just nodded, as if he was making a mental note of something. Jake didn't think much of it, but this was the moment everything started to change. Jake stood at the table, holding his notepad, feeling completely in control of the situation. He had served all kinds of customers today, businessmen, couples, families, and now he had a new table to entertain. The big guy and his friends seemed relaxed, so Jake decided to have a little fun with them. "So, what are we thinking?" Jake asked, tapping his pen against the notepad. "You guys want the usual steak and potatoes, or are we going fancy tonight?" The big man smiled. "What's fancy?" Jake smirked. "Well, we've got the tomahawk prime cut, but it's a little pricey. Don't want you guys getting surprised when the bill comes." The man's friends chuckled, but the man himself just nodded. "Sounds good. Let's get 3 of those." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh, going all out, huh?" He turned to the younger guy at the table, who looked like an assistant. "And for you, or are you just here to watch?" The young man hesitated, looking at the big man before responding. "I'll have the same." Jake jotted it down. "All right, big eaters. And drinks, or is water fine for now?" One of the friends smiled. "We'll take a bottle of your best red wine." Jake let out a low whistle. "Expensive taste. You sure about that?" The man gave a small laugh and nodded. "Yeah, I think we'll be okay." Jake wrote it down, but still felt like something was off. Usually, when people spent this kind of money, they acted a certain way, either super serious or extra demanding. But this guy was too calm, too easygoing, and the way the other waiters and Mr. Collins treated him, it didn't make sense. Still, Jake wasn't going to change his style just because of a feeling. He leaned in slightly and said, "You know, you remind me of someone." The man raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Who's that?" Jake shrugged. "Can't put my finger on it. Some athlete, maybe. You play ball." The man smiled but didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the menu and flipped through it. "I like basketball," he said simply. Jake nodded. "Yeah. Figured. You've got the build for it. But hey, don't worry, man. This restaurant welcomes everyone, even regular folks like you." The man's friends exchanged glances, and the young assistant bit his lip, trying not to react. But the big man just smiled. "Good to know." Jake stood up straight. "All right, I'll get your order in. Sit tight." As he walked back toward the kitchen, he noticed Mr. Collins watching from across the room. The manager's face looked tense, as if he was holding back from saying something. Jake gave him a thumbs up. "Got it under control, boss." Mr. Collins didn't smile. Instead, he let out a slow breath and shook his head. Jake had no idea that he had just made a huge mistake. Jake placed the order and returned to his usual routine, still feeling like he was in control of the situation. He had served the big guy and his friends just like any other table, and to him, That was a job well done. The man had taken all his jokes without a problem, and his friends had laughed along. That meant they were having a good time, right? As the kitchen worked on their food, Jake made his rounds, stopping at other tables, cracking jokes, and making customers smile. At least, the ones who liked his sense of humor. He wasn't worried about the big guy's table at all. In his mind, it was just another group of diners. When the food was finally ready, Jake grabbed the large tray with the 4 perfectly cooked tomahawk prime-cut steaks, their sizzling aroma filling the air. The bottle of expensive red wine was already placed in an ice bucket, waiting for the guests to enjoy. Balancing the tray like a pro, Jake made his way back to the table with a confident stride. As he reached them, he set down each plate carefully, placing the thick, juicy steaks in front of each person. "There you go, gentlemen," he said with a grin. "The best steak in town. Hope it's worth the price." The big man smiled, picking up his knife and testing the steak with a small cut. The meat sliced effortlessly. He nodded in approval. "Looks good." Jake popped open the wine and started pouring. "Only the best for our VIPs," he said with a playful wink. "And by VIPs, I mean anyone who can afford it." The young assistant gave Jake a quick glance, but the big man just chuckled. "Appreciate that." As they ate, Jake hovered nearby, listening in on their conversation. They talked about sports, business, and travel, things that didn't really interest Jake. But something about the way they spoke, especially the big guy, made Jake wonder. "By the way," the big man said as he took another bite, "how long have you been working here?" Jake leaned against the table casually. "Not long. A couple of weeks. But I catch on fast." The man nodded. "Seems like you enjoy your job." Jake shrugged. "It's all right. Pays the bills. But honestly, I could probably run this place better than the manager." One of the friends raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah." Jake smirked. "Yeah. I mean, come on. A place like this. It's all about knowing how to talk to people, keep the rich folks happy, keep the food coming, and act like you belong." The big man took a sip of his wine, nodding slowly. Interesting perspective. Jake, feeling bold, chuckled. "Hey, maybe one day I'll own a place like this myself." For the first time, the big man's expression changed slightly, not in anger, but in amusement, like he had just heard something really funny. Jake had no idea why, but he was about to find out. As Jake walked away from the table, still feeling proud of himself, he noticed Mr. Collins standing near the bar, watching him with a tense expression. The manager had his arms crossed, his fingers tapping against his sleeve. Jake smirked as he approached. "What's up, boss? You look stressed." Mr. Collins sighed. "Jake, do you have any idea who you're talking to at that table?" Jake shrugged. "Just some big guy and his friends." "Why? Are they food critics or something?" The manager shook his head. "No, Jake. That man is one of the most important people in this restaurant." Jake chuckled. "Oh, so he's a regular. A big tipper." Mr. Collins took a slow breath. "He owns the place." Jake's smirk froze. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Wait, what?" Mr. Collins nodded. "That man is the owner of the Golden Prime Steakhouse. He's the reason this place even exists." Jake felt his stomach drop. The jokes, the comments about money, the way he had acted, it all came rushing back in his mind. He had been treating the owner of the restaurant like just another customer, throwing sarcastic remarks at him, doubting whether he could afford the food. For the first time that night, Jake felt nervous. Mr. Collins lowered his voice. "You need to be careful. He's a kind man, but that doesn't mean he'll tolerate disrespect." Jake swallowed hard, glancing back at the table. The big man was still eating, still talking casually with his friends, as if nothing had happened. Maybe, just maybe, Jake could fix this. Taking a deep breath, he walked back toward the table, trying to think of a way to smooth things over. He forced a smile as he approached. "Everything all right here, gentlemen? Enjoying the meal?" The big man looked up at him and smiled. "Yeah, it's great. Thanks." Jake hesitated, unsure of how to continue. His usual confidence was gone. Just wanted to say, if anything isn't perfect, let me know. We want to make sure our VIPs, valued customers, get the best experience." The man nodded. "That's good to hear." Jake waited for a moment, expecting some kind of reaction. Maybe the man would call them out on his behavior. Maybe he would ask for a different waiter. Maybe he would even tell him to leave. But none of that happened. Instead, the man simply smiled and said, "You know, you've got a lot of personality. That's not a bad thing." Jake forced a small laugh. "Yeah, I try to keep things fun." The man nodded. "That's important. But respect is even more important." Jake felt his face heat up. He knew exactly what the man was saying. And suddenly, he realized this wasn't over yet. Something told him he was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. Jake stood at the table, forcing a smile, but his mind was racing. He had spent the whole evening making jokes, acting like he was in charge, only to find out that the man he had been teasing owned the restaurant. His confidence was gone, and for the first time, he didn't know what to say. The big man took another bite of his steak, then wiped his mouth with a napkin. "You said something earlier," he said, looking at Jake. "You think you could run this place better than your manager." Jake felt a lump in his throat. He had been joking when he said that, but now, with the actual owner sitting in front of him, it sounded foolish. Still, he couldn't back down completely. I was just saying that I understand customers. You know how to keep them happy." The man nodded. "That's a good skill. But let me ask you something. Do you think keeping customers happy is just about cracking jokes?" Jake hesitated. He knew the answer was no, but he didn't want to admit it. "Well, I think making people laugh helps." The man smiled. "Sure, it does. But respect is more important." Jake shifted uncomfortably. He could feel the eyes of the other waiters on him. He glanced at Mr. Collins, who stood near the bar, watching the conversation with a serious expression. The man leaned forward slightly. "What if I was just some regular guy who saved up money to bring my family here for a special night? What if I was spending more than I could afford just to enjoy a good meal? Wouldn't I deserve the same respect as someone rich?" Jake swallowed hard. He had never thought of it that way. To him, expensive restaurants were for rich people. He had assumed this man was just another customer who could afford it. But what if he had been wrong? The man continued, his voice calm but firm. "You judged me the second I walked in. You assumed things about me. And instead of treating me like a valued guest, you acted like I was beneath this place." Jake's face burned with embarrassment. He had spent the whole night trying to impress people, trying to be the funniest guy in the room. But now, standing in front of the owner, he felt small. The man leaned back and took a sip of his wine. "I don't like firing people, Jake. I believe in giving second chances. But tell me, do you really think you deserve to work in a place like this?" Jake's heart pounded. He had never felt this kind of pressure before. He had two choices: admit his mistake and learn from it, or let his pride take over and lose everything. For the first time in his life, Jake had to decide what kind of person he really wanted to be. Jake stood frozen, his mind racing with the weight of the big man's words. He felt as though the world had suddenly slowed down. The restaurant around him, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, it all seemed distant now. The only thing that mattered was the question that had just been asked. "Do you really think you deserve to work in a place like this?" The words echoed in Jake's head. He knew he had messed up. He had been too cocky, too quick to judge people based on appearances. But there was a part of him, a small part, that wanted to fight back. To tell the man that he had worked hard, that he was just trying to make people laugh, that he didn't mean any harm. But looking into the big man's eyes, Jake saw something different, a calm understanding. The kind of look that came from someone who had seen it all. This wasn't a man who was angry. He wasn't trying to embarrass Jake. He was just trying to help him see the bigger picture. Jake took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I'm sorry," he said, looking down at the floor. I didn't mean to disrespect you, or anyone. I was just trying to be funny." The big man's expression didn't change, but he nodded slowly. "It's not just about being funny, Jake. It's about understanding who you're talking to. You never know the story behind the person sitting at your table." Jake looked up at him, feeling a little more humbled. He thought about all the times he had cracked jokes at the expense of others, assuming they wouldn't mind, assuming they'd just laugh along. But what if, instead of making them laugh, he had made them uncomfortable? What if he had pushed people away with his careless humor? "I've been doing it all wrong, haven't I?" Jake said quietly, his hands clenching the notepad in front of him. The big man smiled, but it wasn't mocking. It was a smile that showed understanding. "We all make mistakes, Jake, but what matters is how we learn from them." Jake nodded slowly, realizing how true that was. He had always thought that if he could make people laugh, he could get away with anything. But there was so much more to being a good person, a good waiter, and a good employee. It was about respect, empathy, and understanding. For the first time that night, Jake truly understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. It wasn't just about serving food and making tips. It was about creating an environment where people felt valued. Whether they were rich or poor, famous or unknown, they all deserved the same respect. "I don't want to be that guy anymore," Jake said, his voice full of sincerity. "I want to do better." The big man nodded. "I can see that. That's all anyone can ask for." Jake looked around the restaurant, taking in the bustling atmosphere, the people enjoying their meals, the staff working together. For the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of it all. He wasn't just another waiter trying to stand out. He was someone who had a chance to make a real difference, starting with how he treated others. As he walked away from the table, Jake felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. He wasn't perfect, and he knew he had a lot to learn. But for the first time, he was excited to grow. He was ready to become the kind of person who earned respect, not just from the customers, but from his colleagues, and most importantly, from himself. The next few days after the conversation with the big man felt different for Jake. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, but at the same time, he felt a new kind of pressure. He had made a promise to himself to do better, and now it was time to prove that he meant it. The first change came when he walked into work that morning. As soon as he entered the restaurant, he noticed a shift in the way he saw things. The bustling staff, the clinking of plates, the soft murmur of customers, everything seemed more meaningful. Jake had always been part of the routine, but now he saw how every action mattered. Mr. Collins caught his eye and walked over with a warm smile. "You all right, Jake?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Jake smiled back, more genuinely than he had before. "Yeah, I'm good. I've been thinking a lot." Mr. Collins gave him an encouraging nod. "I can see that. I'm glad to hear it." Jake began his shift with a fresh mindset. He no longer saw himself as just a guy with a funny joke or a quick comment. He began paying attention to his customers in a way he never had before. He listened more, asked thoughtful questions, and always made sure to check in on them without being overbearing. One afternoon, a family came in to celebrate a birthday. Jake recognized the dad's face immediately. The man had been in the restaurant before, but this time, he was different. The man was nervous, checking his phone often and looking around like he wasn't sure if he belonged. Jake approached with a soft smile, making sure his tone was warm but not too eager. "Hi, welcome. Is there anything special we can do for you today?" The dad smiled back, a little shy. "It's my daughter's birthday. I hope this is okay. We've never been here before." Jake nodded. Of course, we're happy to have you. Let me know if you need anything. I'll make sure you have a great experience. Throughout their meal, Jake made sure they felt comfortable. He checked on them without hovering, offered suggestions that matched their tastes, and even gave them a little extra dessert when the birthday cake didn't arrive on time. By the end of the meal, the family was smiling, and the dad looked more relaxed than when he had first walked in. "Thank you, Jake. This was really great," the dad said, handing over the tip with a friendly handshake. "We'll definitely be back." Jake nodded, feeling a sense of pride he had never experienced before. It wasn't about the tip. It wasn't about the fancy food or the restaurant's reputation. It was about knowing that he had made a difference in someone's day, in a positive way. As the days went by, Jake's new attitude began to affect everyone around him. His coworkers noticed the change. They saw how he treated customers with respect, how he was no longer the loud, attention-grabbing waiter, but someone who took pride in the service he provided. Even Mr. Collins began to give him more responsibility, trusting him to handle more challenging situations with grace. Then, one evening, as Jake was walking past the bar, he spotted the big man again, his boss. He was sitting at a table near the back, quietly enjoying a meal with a couple of friends. Jake didn't hesitate. He walked over, greeted him with a respectful nod, and said, "Everything good here?" The big man looked up, his smile genuine. "Yeah, everything's great. You've been doing well, Jake." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond anything he had felt before. "Thanks. I've learned a lot from you." The big man nodded. "You're welcome. I knew you had it in you." Jake walked away from the table with a new sense of purpose. He had learned the hard way that respect was earned through actions, not words. And while the road ahead would have its challenges, Jake felt ready to take them on. Not just as a waiter, but as someone who had finally understood what it meant to truly serve others.